All right, everybody, we're going to throw you for a little loop here. This is actually Gump speaking. I know you're used to hearing Kelly do the last section or so, but I am going to attempt to teach you painting.
We're going to try to mix it up here. So Gump's doing the driving, and I'm going to stand over his shoulder and berate him as if he does wrong things.
We're going to start with a new image, going up to File, clicking on New. Here you'll get a window that you're presented with, and just make sure you check your settings and make sure that this is set to RGB. Of course, Kelly earlier has gone over the width, the height, and the resolution, but I am going to choose RGB here. Now that our window is open, we're going to go ahead and choose a paintbrush, seeing how that's what we're going to be working with today. I choose the paintbrush over here in the tool palette. Up here in the tool options, I'm presented with several paint brushes of different sizes. Kelly, do you want to
Exactly.
speak about
you know,
these?
some of those paints, the paint brushes come in kind of two different flavors. One with a hard edge, as you can see from what you're looking at there, and then some of them with a nice, soft, smooth edge, which kind of gives a nice feathering effect to the edge of your paint. And then, of course, at the very bottom, there are some specialized paint brushes that Adobe has decided to throw in there, kind of some that mimic real-world paintbrush strokes, and of course some that have like completely goofy things like the stars, but can really be fun if you wanted to, I don't know, create a like a birthday card or a greeting card. Some of these little effects can be really handy for that.
Now, keep in mind that's the way you choose different types of brushes. You can choose different sizes of brushes by either choosing them here, which was the 1 pixel brush, or choosing further down a larger size brush. This one is soft edge. Or you can actually just choose the brush that you want. Let's say we want hard edge. Choose this hard edge here and change the master diameter up here, and it goes all the way up to 2,500.
This is going to be huge.
That's a pretty big one.
You do have a lot of different options in that brush options box there. Looking at the diameter, there's actually two different icons there. The one on the left side shows what it would be like if you were to simply click, which would be a nice little circle, and then the second on the right there, the long stretch, that's what it would be like if you were actually creating a stroke. So you can see from both perspectives what it would be like to click and then what it would be like to actually make a stroke.
Okay, so what I'm seeing is you guys are just basically grabbing a paintbrush and you're just painting, right?
We're playing.
And you're showing the artist how they can pick different paintbrushes to paint with.
Exactly.
Now here's something I'm curious about. I saw Gump click on it, but let's talk a little bit about colors. I mean, you did green and you did black, and
yeah, black, just doing paintbrushes in black would be kind of boring, right? So let's talk about how we can actually introduce color into our paintbrush strokes here.
Okay, down here we have foreground color, which would be this one. Of course, if you leave your mouse set over it, you get little tool tips. It says set foreground color. Here you see where it would say set background color. You can change these colors as Kelly has described earlier. You can single click on that foreground color and change it to red or any other color that you prefer by clicking in the color spectrum there and dragging up and down, or by choosing these arrows and pulling those up and down there. So I choose a color blue here. It changes in my foreground color here. My background color right now is set to green. I could change that also by doing the same thing, either clicking the little arrows and dragging them, or clicking in the color spectrum and dragging that up and down. And let's choose red there. Now my foreground color is blue and my background color is red.
So at this time, if you're going to be doing any paintbrush strokes, you're going to only be painting with your foreground color. In this case, it's going to be blue. If we wanted to switch back and forth between our foreground and background, maybe we'd take making two different strokes, clicking that little icon with the two little arrows will switch back and forth. Hey, Gump, just not to throw you off too far, but if I wanted to set that back to the default, the black and white, how would I do that?
Down here, diagonal to the two arrows you'll see a little black and a little white box. If you were to click on those, you immediately go back to foreground color of black and a background color of white.
Okay, so now that we've lost our color, is there another way that we can actually select colors instead of using the color picker? Maybe some of our palettes we might introduce?
Over here to the right, you see a swatches palette. You can choose colors. As soon as you mouse over, you get a little eyedropper. If you were to choose that green color, of course, over here you would see the foreground color change to green. If you were to choose the red color, of course, the foreground color would change to red. You could swap those. Now your foreground color is white. Now your background color is red. Also over here in the swatches palette, you have several different swatches that you can go to here. There are quite a few of them. If you wanted to do web safe colors, you could click on web safe colors. You're presented with a option box that says replace current color swatches with the swatches from the web safe colors. Yes, you want to go ahead and click OK, and that tells Adobe to go ahead and change these color swatches over here, and then you could choose them like I showed you earlier.
So now this is specific to web design, but this does create a swatches with all 216 of the web safe colors. That makes a lot of sense to a web designer. But of course, Photoshop has included all of those different presets, so feel free to go look at all those. I mean, there's a long list there of some Pantone, some web safe, and even a web spectrum. If you're a web designer or a printer, you've got your Pantones. In order to get back to the original settings for default, you would simply come up to the reset swatches and click on that, and then say OK to that dialog box, and our swatches have been reset. It's pretty handy.
Pretty handy. Now, another thing is if you wanted to change this scene and fill it with the foreground color or the background color, let's actually change back to our default settings, which are black and white. Now, if I wanted to change over to my foreground color, I would choose Alt and Backspace. That changes me over to my foreground color. If I wanted to change over to my background color, I could hit Control and Backspace, and it fills the entire area with either the background color or the foreground color.
Exactly, Gump. And of course, this same thing holds true with selections. If you had a selection area and hit Alt Backspace, you would fill with your foreground color, and Control Backspace to fill with the background color. Two very important hot shortcut tips for you to memorize if instead of going up to the fill. You can also get to the same place by going up to the Edit menu and choosing the fill option there. It does the exact same thing, but we're just including the keyboard shortcuts for using, as you can see here, foreground or background. So if in case you forget that and you can't remember, just go to the Edit Fill menu. It does the same thing.
So, Gump, real quick, you've shown us how we can pull up a paintbrush and paint on our canvas there. How about, how do you erase it?
All right, let's say that I had made a stroke on a canvas that I was painting on. This is going to touch a little bit on layers, so I'm going to really quick add a layer down here. Of course, later on in this VTM, we're going to teach you more about layers, but for right now, I'm just going to click on this little icon down here, which creates a new layer in my layers palette. I'll go over here and choose my paintbrush. It's right now set at, it appears to be a hard edge 13 size brush, and I can just, let's say, paint my name.
Mark's about to have a baby, so he's starting right now learning how to paint like a 2-year-old.
So there I paint my name, and now if I want to erase,
you know,
I
people
can grab
are probably going, Mark? Who the hell is Mark?
You should say G-U-M-B.
It should be Gump, but you know, I have to throw my real name in there every once in a while.
Yeah, I guess so.
So if I wanted to erase the name Mark, i.e. Gump, I would choose the eraser tool here. Make sure I choose the eraser tool here as well. As you see, the shortcut key for that is E. Go back over here, and I'm actually erasing what is on this particular layer here. Like I said earlier, we're going to show you more about that in this VTM later.
But I think the important thing to know is that he's not actually erasing the pixels on the background layer, only the pixels that are on layer 1. If we had an image underneath there, you'd see that he's not actually affecting anything underneath this thing, and only affecting the pixels that were created by the brush stroke.
When I erase the image, all I do is I choose the eraser tool over here. I click on the eraser tool, and when I'm ready to erase, I click and hold the mouse button down. It is the left click button. Hold it down, and I continue to erase through the entire image. I can drag left and right, up and down, and it erases the entire image that was on that particular layer.
Okay, that's good. Now, let's go ahead and move on, Gump, to let's take a quick look at stroke and fill. Well, we've talked a little bit about fill, actually, but let's look at stroke.
All right, stroke, we're going to go ahead and create a rectangular marquee. I'm going to go ahead and leave the style set to normal so I can make a selection. As you see, and Kelly talked about earlier in selections, what's inside of the selection is what will be chosen. Those are the pixels that we'll be working on. This is a little different than that. We go up to Edit after making a selection and go down here to where it says Stroke. With the little dots right there, it shows me that I'm going to be presented with a dialog box. Here in this dialog box, it's going to ask you the width that you want your stroke. Right now I have it set to 8 pixels. Let's say we want 4 pixels. I can change the color of the stroke here by double-clicking on the color box there and choosing, just like we do in the other color palettes, choosing colors here by dragging inside the color spectrum, or choosing the triangles here and dragging those, and of course sliding through here, choosing a color. Let's choose a bright green or a dark red. How about that?
Dark red.
Let's try a dark red.
Yeah.
And clicking OK. Now I have a stroke width of 4, and my color is going to be kind of a maroon dark red. Down here you see where it says location. You have inside, center, or outside. If I were to choose inside, my stroke would be on the inside of the selection here. If I were to choose center, I would get 2 pixels to the left and 2 pixels to the right of this particular selection all the way around. If I were to choose outside, my 4 pixel stroke would be on the outside of this selection area here. Of course, we'll be getting into modes later in this lesson. You can choose several different modes.
Right, right. Yeah, the modes will definitely come in place when we talk about layers in the next section, but we wanted to open up this menu just so you have an idea of how many different types of modes there are. But certainly for the stroke, using the inside, center, and outside. In this case, what do you want to use? The
Let's
center?
try center.
Okay.
That's going to give me 2 pixels to the left and 2 pixels to the right. So we do have a 4 pixel color maroon, and I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and that's going to give me a stroke value there. I'm going to go ahead and deselect that so you can see exactly what we're doing there.
So in case you had an image that needed a border around the outside
there you go.
or even a border on the inside, this is a really handy way of creating a box.
Sure
There's
is.
lots of different ways you can create this, but the stroke is an easy way to get to the results that you want. Now, of course, Gump is erasing his very difficult made box.
It was a hard box to make there,
I guess so. All right, now that we've looked at stroke, let's go ahead and look at the paint bucket for a minute.
The paint bucket tool.
Hey, Gump, if I could interrupt you for just a second.
All right.
One thing I did forget to mention is when we're going to talk about filling with the paint bucket, there's one more way that we can actually select colors that I'd really like these guys to also understand.
Okay.
We've talked about the color picker, which is single-clicking inside the foreground or background. We've talked a bit about the swatches and how we can actually introduce more swatches and change those, but we haven't actually talked about the color palette. I wonder if we could kind of look at just a third way that we can introduce colors, maybe in this section for the paint brush.
All right, so let's make a little marquee selection here. And let's say, you can choose a color here and do it like we were doing earlier. You can get it from the swatches area. Kelly wants to know about the color area here. If you wanted to set values, if you knew the particular value, of course, 255, 255, and 255 is going to give us a value of white.
So what we're doing here is we're adding a bunch of red, a bunch of green, and a bunch of blue. We're maxing out the values of all of those, which will give us white.
Right.
And if we subtract all the values of red, green, and blue to 0, 0, 0, we've got black.
Right.
So we can make any tint, any hue, any spectrum color in between those by modifying these numbers. Or, like Gump is indicating here, these little sliders on the side here, pumping them around, pushing them up and down. You can see that the little swatch there changes colors, which also is adding a color to our foreground color on the left side of the screen. Good. So we think we've introduced 3 ways of actually doing colors. Now, Gump, let's get back to that paint bucket tool.
Now that we've got a color chosen and have used our color palette here, over here beneath the 2 tools beneath the paintbrush tool, you're going to see the gradient tool. Actually going to go and click on that. You see once you click on the little arrow and hold your mouse button down, you have 2 tools in there, the gradient tool and the paint bucket tool. We're going to go ahead and choose the paint bucket tool. Once I choose the paint bucket tool and click inside my selection, it's a really fast way to fill that selection with a solid color.
That's pretty simple.
That definitely
Pretty
does the trick.
self-explanatory, don't you think?
So what happens
Yeah.
if you don't have a selection you click? Does it just fill the entire layer with that color?
Let me go ahead and undo this a couple times and deselect my selection. And if I do not have a selection chosen and I click over here, it will fill the entire canvas with that particular color that I've chosen.
Easy
One thing
enough.
that's important to note about the Paint Bucket tool is up in the options area for that particular tool, there's an option called tolerance. Right now it's set for 32. That really works a lot the same way that the Magic Wand tool for the selection. If we have an image open and we try to fill with the Paint Bucket, it does calculate over tolerance. So you might want to play around with some of those settings if your Paint Bucket doesn't work the way you want it to the first time through. But for filling big, broad backgrounds with one single color, this is a phenomenal way of doing it.
All right, well, that's good enough for the paint bucket. So, you know, where you found the paint bucket, there was also a gradient tool.
Sure was.
Now, I know you're going to be working with this more a little bit later on, but, you know, go ahead and give us a quick
Kind
introduction
of
to
breeze
it.
over it.
Yeah.
You know, Gump, that you were talking about the foreground and the background. Most of the time we've been talking about brushes and we've been dealing with the foreground. We've been filling with the foreground. Why would we want to have a foreground and a background? Well, to simply answer that, I would say that we use gradients to create a smooth transition from our foreground to our background. So a gradient tool is a phenomenal way of illustrating how you would use the foreground and the background in unison. I'll let you go ahead and run from there.
Going to go ahead and create a selection here and choose my gradient tool. Up here in the options palette, you have several different options that you can choose from of what type and how you want your gradient to look. We're going to start here by using the linear gradient tool. There are 5 different options here. You have linear, you also have radial, you also have angle, reflected gradient, as well as diamond gradient. We're going to start off by using linear gradient. You can click here on the arrow to get the gradient picker, or you can just click on the gradient itself. Here you're presented with a option dialog box, and you see here you can have where it changes from foreground to the background color, or where it changes from foreground to transparent or black to white.
Now, of course, those first 3 look very, very similar, but the foreground to background, if Gump has, in his foreground and background colors on his toolbar, had chosen some other different colors, like maybe a red and maybe a blue, say, then that option will look a little bit different the next time you go to it. So now he has red and blue. Now the first one, going from foreground to background, is actually going to use his 2 colors. These other presets ignore the colors that are in the foreground and the background and use just the colors that you can see in those little swatches.
Except for this one here, it does use the foreground to transparent.
Certainly.
Which we'll get into later when we get more into gradients. But let's go ahead and use the foreground to background, since that's what we've been working with. So I'll go ahead and choose that by clicking on it and then clicking OK. Now, if I wanted to add a gradient to the selection that I have here, I can click anywhere at the top or even past the top. Click once, hold my mouse button down, and drag my mouse all the way down to the bottom of the selection and let my mouse go. And it gives me a nice transition between red and blue.
Right. And in this case, where the point that you start and you click, that's going to start with your foreground color, and where you end up and release is going to be your background color.
I'll show you what Kelly's talking about here for a moment. If I were to start in the middle, of course, that's where the red is going to start the transition to blue.
So you can see everything above that point where he started is all red, and everything below it's going to be all blue, and it makes a smooth transition along that gradient line. Also, another thing that you can do with this linear tool is if you want to make sure that you've got this is specifically for the linear, if you want to make a perfectly horizontal or a perfectly vertical gradient, you can hold down your shift key at the same time that you're creating this gradient, and it will constrain it to those either horizontal or vertical aspects, just like that.
I'm going to show them the radial.
Go for the radial. That's a fun one.
We're going to choose the radial up here. Let's change the colors. What kind of colors do you want to go for?
Something really wild and wacky, like maybe green and yellow.
Whoa.
Whoa.
I don't know if
Green
you
and
can get
yellow.
more funky.
Kelly's choosing these colors, folks. All right, there we have green and yellow, and we've chosen the radial gradient here. If you choose somewhere in the middle of your selection and just pull outwards, of course you can shift to constrain that, or you can just drag it any which way you like just by clicking your mouse and letting it go wherever you like.
It'll actually create a gradient that's in a radial pattern starting from the foreground in the middle and radiating from outwards to transition into the background.
Wow, we have a little window that's popped up here. We could add new gradients and stuff of that nature. We'll get into that later.
Let's see if we can't get rid of that thing.
There you go. Hide that.
Hide that for just a second.
All right, for gradient, I think that's pretty good for introduction VTM. Like I said, I know you're going to be getting into it a little bit more later on when we start getting into some of the more advanced things. Let's go ahead and let's look at something interesting, Gump. Let's take a look at the clone tool. Let's use the cowboy scene. I think that'd be pretty cool if you remove some items out of that scene.
This is one of my favorite little tools here.
Now, Gump has gotten pretty proficient at using this clone tool, folks. The clone tool's major purpose in life is
cloning.
Now, what does cloning mean? Is to actually take pixels out of one part of our image and place them into another part of our image. It's a little bit difficult to use at first. It takes a little practice, but Gump here is the master of the clone tool, so I'm going to let him explain exactly what's going on with that.
First of all, I'm going to choose the clone tool over here. As you've noticed, there are two tools in this option area. I have the clone stamp tool and the pattern stamp tool. We're going to get to the pattern stamp tool here shortly. But let's start out with the clone stamp tool. It's actually pretty fun. So with this scene, I see a door, a cowboy hat, cowboy jacket, and some boots. What do you guys want to do? And maybe you want to get rid of something or add something?
Let's go for something interesting. I want you to take the coat out. I want you to move the hat down so that it's on the same hook that that coat would have been on.
All right. So what I'm going to do is I've chosen the clone tool. Now here we're going to pick a spot of the image where we want to sample from. Buzz wants us to remove the coat out of the scene. So I want to sample just below the coat and hit my Alt key. I'm presented with this little
target icon.
There you go. Let's try that. Presented with this little target icon as soon as I hit the Alt key. Then I'm going to click one time with the left mouse button.
When you do that, what's it doing when you're clicking with that button?
Well, it's pretty much telling Adobe that this is what pixels I want you to sample so that when I move up and start painting, you're going to start painting from here.
I gotcha.
So now that I've sampled that area right there, I want to pretty much move straight up so that I don't lose my line there and begin painting right here. Now you'll notice as soon as I click the left mouse button down to start painting, I get this little crosshair there. I myself look at the crosshair and watch what it's doing while I'm painting so I can see exactly what's going on and where I'm painting. Some people prefer to look at the circle while they're actually painting. I prefer to look at the crosshair there.
Exactly, because if you're not paying attention to your crosshair, eventually you run into the existing image that you're trying to paint out, and you'll start duplicating right over what you've just taken out. But look at that. That is very precise, fantastic mastery of the tool there, Gump. And you're actually taking that jacket right out. This clone tool, as he's working on this clone tool is a photo retoucher's best friend. You can take out anything out of an image that you want to. Like, let's say if you have a picture of a street scene and you need to take out a wire that's hanging in the wrong place and detracting from your overall scene, well, just use your clone tool, sample from another area in your scene, and remove any wires, any telephone poles, entire cars, you know what? The next time you go to a family reunion and you take a picture and you want to take old Uncle Jimbo Bob out of the image, take your clone tool and just wipe him straight out as he never existed. It's fantastic for that kind of stuff. So Gump now is removing his entire coat.
I do want you to notice one thing, though, Kelly. When you click down here and I sampled down here by hitting the Alt key and clicking one time, and then I started to paint up here. If you notice, the crosshairs stay the same distance away from where I'm painting. Now, this can kind of goof you up in the long run. Take, for example, if I started to clone these boots, let's say I choose these boots here, and I started to paint up here. Okay, well, there you see my boots in the circle, and you can almost see the crosshair there, but if I keep moving up, I end up getting the wall.
Right.
And I don't get, if you look at where the crosshair is, I don't start getting the boots again. Just wanted you to keep that in mind, that it can cause some problems in the long run, and you just have to be really careful using the clone tool.
Exactly. I think the thing to stress also is this tool does take some practice to get used to, and how its little nuances actually work.
So let's move this hat down. I'm going to go ahead and hit Alt again, single click to sample where the hat's at, and we're going to move it down to where the coat used to be. Now again, this is a reason why I am watching my crosshair so that I can drag it along the side of that hat and pretty much get the entire hat into the scene. Now that I've created a hat down there, we want to go ahead and get rid of this hat up here. So let's sample above the hat, drag straight down, and take the hat out. You can see I did what I was just telling everybody that is a complication there. You start duplicating the hat over and over again if your tool is too close to where you had sampled from.
Right. So it does take a little while to master. After a while, if when you're first using it, you might see that things start duplicating, like Gump was explaining, or getting patterns. Keep using the tool, practice that tool a lot, and pretty soon you're going to be a tool master.
Now, I want to challenge you here on this, Gump, for a minute.
Shoot.
Clean that up for me, because that looks horrible.
Looks pretty rough, doesn't it?
Yeah. In fact, yeah, you might want to lighten the whole thing, then we can show some new tools on how we can kind of fix that up a little bit.
You know what would be a really good idea to see where that lightened area above the hat is?
Mm-hmm.
There's two tools that would help you lighten up a part of an image and darken a part of an image. Those are the dodge and burn tools. The dodge and burn tool is actually a throwback to the old days of dark rooms, where photographers used little pieces of sticks with pieces of paper on it to dodge light away from the emulsion paper. While Gump is cleaning this up a little bit more here, then he might switch over to the dodge and burn tool and kind of illustrate that a little bit more. But, you know, don't let me rush you. Just keep doing what you're going to do there.
The dodge tool is actually going to lighten things up a little bit. If I wanted to lighten the wall up here or lighten the door up over here, I would choose the dodge tool and just kind of go over that area just a little bit. I have options.
I would pick on the area that looks bad.
This area over here.
That's just me.
That's a pretty rough area.
So as you see, as he's painting down on those darkened areas, as he goes over and over and over, it's actually brightening up those pixels in that area. Now, up in the options area, you see that there is an exposure. It's set pretty low right now, which is a good thing if you want to use this tool. Setting it at high exposure quickly darkens or lightens things up. So he's got a really good level for exposure, somewhere around 20%, so that he can slowly brighten up the image over time.
Up here in the exposure area, too, you can either use the slider or you can just type a value in that you want instead of using the slider. The burn tool will darken areas. If you've come through here and gotten too light in some of the areas, you can start to darken those areas up.
And this is a fantastic example on a black and white image of showing how to darken up an area and how to lighten up an area. Another photo retouching tool of choice.
I see my area over here got kind of pretty beat up by the clone tool. Like I said, you have to really watch what you're doing with the clone tool and check your distances when you sample areas.
But overall, I think you did a fantastic job, Gump. We've showed that the clone tool can be used to remove objects from your scene, and it can be used to add objects to your scene.
What do you guys want to see now?
Clean that up more.
It's pretty rough, huh?
Yes.
Just remember, folks, even though we're being instructors right now, we are still both students, and Buzz is looking over both of our shoulders.
Yes.
We're learning with you.
So how would you go about going in there, Gump, and fixing up around that hat some?
This hat on this side or this side of the hat?
Well, all
All of the above?
Yeah, pretty much all sides.
First of all, I'd probably take the
There you go.
diameter of my brush down a little bit, since
Okay.
now it is pretty big. I want to make sure it can fit in between this area right here.
Did you do any kind of that fancy control zoom in so that you can work a little bit closer
You
with?
can do that little fancy tool that Kelly showed us a little while
click
ago,
and
that
drag
marquee
and- yeah.
selection with the zoom tool, and really get in there. It does kind of cause a little problem with selecting for my clone tool, but I can go up here and click Alt, let's say about right here in the shadow.
Yeah, that looks good.
Let's try that right there. So I've Alt-clicked there. Now I want to sample about right there to clean this area up.
Now you're talking.
That looks nice.
Now I'm feeling a little bit happier.
Wow.
Not bad. Not
Straightens
bad.
it right
Go
up.
down just a little bit, get that little smudge out. Yeah, right in there. Good, good, good. Okay.
How's that?
Making me happier now.
There's your hat.
Now, the trick is also with the clone tool, you can see that when he's doing it, you can barely see any kind of edge. Gump's been using a brush with a very smooth edge on it, kind of a feathered brush. You really don't want to use this with a hard-edged brush because you'll get a very hard edge when you create it, and your mistakes will be seen much more vividly. Using a soft edge brush is the way to go on the clone tool.
All right. Guys ready to move on to something else?
Yeah, that looks really good. Okay, so that actually covers the dodge and burn. Gump, let's have a little fun. What I want you to do is go ahead and close that scene out and start a new scene for me now. Let's get into the stamp tool. Make something interesting.
This one I have a really good time with. Over here by the clone stamp tool, you also have the pattern stamp tool. I'm just going to kind of reiterate some of the things we just went over. With the pattern stamp tool, we come over here and we have options for the pattern stamp tool. Again, you have the brush sizes. You can either set the brush size yourself by using the master diameter, or you can scroll down and choose a brush size that you prefer. Right now, I am going to get quite a big one. Let's try 70. How's that sound?
That was a big one.
Modes, as we were discussing earlier, we're going to get into later. I just wanted to go ahead and open that up for you to show it to you. Opacity is going to be the opacity that the stamp tool puts down the particular pattern that I've chosen. I'm going to go ahead and leave that at 100% right now.
Which means all the pixels that you put down at a opacity of 100%, we're not going to be able to see through them, right?
They're going to
Exactly.
be opaque.
100% opaque. The flow is
just the amount of actual paint that comes out of this tool and spreads to the outside.
over here. We're going to go ahead and choose a pattern. I like the bubbles myself, guys. What do you guys think?
Bubbly kind of guy.
All
You're
right.
the bubble master.
Let's choose the bubbles here in the pattern area.
Now, actually, one quick thing. Photoshop has a number of different preset patterns, but that doesn't mean that you're constrained to just those. You can create your own, and we'll be showing you how to do that later on.
Right. And they do have quite an abundance of different patterns down here that you can choose from. If you want to go ahead and play with those, you're more than welcome to. We're going to choose the bubble pattern right now, though. And I did choose a semi-large paintbrush there. And all I did was I clicked over here to the left one time, and I started dragging to the right. And it repeats that pattern over and over again throughout my image. Now, if I really want to get it done, I can crank the size of that brush up.
Oh, my goodness.
Come through here and put my pattern down.
But it's a nice way to make a background that's tiled and repeating. Some websites look kind of like this on their background. I wouldn't suggest it, but Gump's website would.
Oh, of course. It's an awesome background. I would use it time and time again. There's different patterns like I was telling you about. You can choose these over here. Let's kind of play around and see what the nature patterns are all about here. Oh, looks like we might have some flowers, guys.
Oh, no.
How's that? Look at there. Daisies.
All right.
And it's nice that it's making a smooth transition from the bubbles into the daisies. That's horrifying, but quaint.
So that is the stamp tool, ladies and gentlemen. And let's see. Let's take a look at, let's just say, how about one more thing?
Okay.
Look at the heel tool.
The heel tool. This is actually going to be pretty fun. I'm going to go ahead and close this image out. And in your samples folder, in your Adobe programs folder, you have these little samples of images, TIFF images, so on and so forth. We went ahead and surfed around the web and grabbed us an image of an elderly woman with wrinkles. Now, believe it or not, we're going to remove these wrinkles with the heal tool, which you'll find over here to the left of your paintbrush.
So with the heal tool, you'll be able to make her, say, 18 and
we'll no.
Okay.
No.
Well, I think 18's pushing it a little bit, but let's go from, let's say, 65 to maybe 45.
18?
All kidding aside, though, the heal tool is actually a cousin to the clone tool, but it's only available in Photoshop 7.0. It's a brand new tool, and I'm telling you, after you use this thing, you're going to want to run out and get the upgrade as well. This is a gotta-have-it kind of tool to have.
If it makes her 18, I will.
It's a really fun tool, actually, and you do use it the same way you use the clone tool or the stamp tool. If you're going to sample an area, let's say, actually, let's crank up my diameter size there to a round number of 30. Let's say I want to sample this area here. If I click Alt, it starts to sample the area there, and if I move over here, I want to remove these wrinkles right there. Just nice and slow, kind of stroking over those wrinkles.
So what is the difference between the clone stamp and
The difference between the clone stamp and the healing brush tool is the fact that the clone stamp will take the pixels as they are and reproduce them in a new area the way they were sampled. The healing brush tool works just in a slightly different way. It does, in fact, sample the textures or the pixels from a source location, but when it paints down on this new area, but doesn't darken the image or lighten the image. So we don't have to worry about accidentally getting a darker part of our image when we use the healing brush tool. It's ignoring everything except the texture of the area of the pixels we sample from. You can kind of see as he goes through this, one area can be texture, like in case he wanted to sample from the forehead in a darkened area and then go ahead and paint those wrinkles away on her cheek. We're not going to paint down a darkened cheek area. It's going to take the texture from the forehead and paint it onto the cheek, but not adding the extra color.
Wow.
We say we take these wrinkles away from her lips too.
I'm now going through every one of my photos.
All right, guys, that is the clone tool. What do you think?
She still looks 100.
The wrinkles are pretty much gone, though. The
She's
deep,
smoothed out
heavy
a
wrinkles
little
are
bit.
gone.
That's amazing.
The wrinkles are gone?
Do you want to take away the wrinkles on her chin?
Maybe, I guess.
All right.
I think he's fishing for you to do some more work.
Did she melt?
She's not melted.
Well, if those aren't wrinkles, then she's melted or something. Putting scales on her chin.
She has scales. It does tend to use the pixels over in the area of the crosshairs and replaces the texture of the area with the circular paintbrush over where you're painting. So it does kind of mess things up a little bit. So it's going to take some practice. That's actually only the third time I've used that tool.
Hey, it's 7.0's new feature. We haven't had a time to really practice a whole lot to
Look
get
at
these
that
things
chin.
down, but it is really well worth it.
Okay.
What do you want to do with it?
Plastic surgery.
No, I'll be kind.
I'm just glad to say that Gump is driving.
That's right. Just blame it on Gump.
All right, let's do one last thing then. I'll go ahead and close that out. That heal tool is quite interesting. I can see where it can be very powerful if you spend a little bit of time and really get in there, and I'm not going to be that bad on you. Go ahead and give me a new scene real quick. That's good. And, earlier I kind of want to wrap this up by kind of going back to where we were at the very beginning, where at the very beginning we were talking about brushes, and here's where you select a brush, and there's all these different types of brushes. How about brush presets? Are there ways to manipulate the way a brush responds? I I'm not trying to get really advanced. I mean, I know there is. I'm just saying, can we show a couple of things real quick just to give our viewers out there something interesting to play with?
Now that you mention it, Buzz, there is in Photoshop 7 a whole new entire brush engine. It's fantastic. You can find that brush engine in the same place that we would find the file browser up in the palette well.
Whoa. Hang on, sorry. Go back to a regular brush first. Sorry, there's some I got in mind here.
Okay.
Just a regular stroke brush, and what I'm wanting to happen here is with Gump having one of these regular brushes selected and this new engine that you're talking about, we can go into the brushes palette up there in the palette well, and we can actually make almost any kind of brush we want. So he's starting from, let's say, like a base brush right now.
Okay, let's take a look at the first one that he has going, the Shapes Dynamic. You can see that there's lots of different options, and as we put check marks on things, we actually get to add those to our brushes. At the very bottom, we have a little thumbnail of what our brush stroke looks like. Let's take a look at the Shape Dynamics at first. At the very top, there's a jitter, size jitter, and as we increase that, you can take a look at the stroke becomes actually jittery. Well, there's so many different options in here. We could never possibly go through all of them, but I encourage you to get in here, put these check marks in here, and play around with some of these. But we can do a number of things, like creating a jittery line instead of just a straight flat line. How about we add a little bit of scattering? Now you can see our stroke looks sort of like somebody has flicked paint onto a canvas. And now if we create a stroke, we can actually increase the number of dots that are going to be created. It looks like somebody has just gone splat with a paintbrush onto a canvas.
And for our artists out there that are creating textures for, let's say, their 3D models for games or for their actual 3D production work, this could be really handy for generating.
Oh my goodness, this would be great for generating textures. Putting some random textures is what people are often going for, creating random textures. Oh, what's that? Freckles. Yeah, I guess that could be some good freckles. That's using those patterns and
freckles.
But do remember, it is in Photoshop 7, so if you're using a previous version, you're not going to be, you won't have
All right, guys, just so you can keep up with what I'm doing on the screen here. I actually went through and I chose texture, since how you're discussing textures. I was kind of scrolling through so I could get some scatter images here of the way the paintbrush is going to react. Started talking about textures. I wanted to make sure to get in there. You can click this little arrow here in the up by the brush as well. Click this little arrow and choose this little option arrow here, this little icon here, and go down here, and there are several different patterns that you could choose from for either a texture or something of that nature. Maybe let's try rock patterns. And here we could choose rocks, any type. Let's try these. Scale them up just a little bit. Now you see our brush will appear to paint as those rocks appear. Maybe you'll see it better if I bump up the size of my brush there. And
Very nice.
You get a texture of those particular rocks. The more you paint over, you see the darker it gets. One swoop, you just get the actual texture. And like I said, they do come, Adobe does come with the presets of textures and surfaces.
Okay, well that's cool. Yeah, I just wanted you to get in there real quick and show some of that, just so that our viewers out there can start playing with some of these features and really getting in there and having some fun.
So do I have to stop playing now?
See, you're having fun. That's what it's all about.
There he goes, folks. He's off.
Well, that just to kind of do a quick recap, that pretty much sums up this intro to painting section. Basically, what we wanted to do is just provide you with an introduction to dealing with a foreground color and a background color. And as Kelly and Gump did a great job of showing you, there's 3 different ways.
Kelly, don't give that to Gump.
Oh, whatever. There's 3 different ways to to come in here and adjust your colors. You saw the difference between the foreground color and the background color. From there, we took a look at a basic paintbrush and how to select different brushes, how to use the eraser, how you could use the quick fill using the Control and Alt and the backspace keys. We also took a look at, as he's now doing on the screen to remind you, we also took a quick look at stroke and fill options found up underneath Edit for just making some quick outlines or filling in an entire area. We also took a look at the paint bucket. I'm about to way outrun you here, my friend. We went from there into the gradient. Then we took a look at the clone tool, and we saw how we could clone pixels from one location to another. Then we took a look at dodge and burn, ways of lightening and darkening areas. From there, we looked real briefly at the stamp tool. Then we looked at the heal tool, and then we finally ended up with the going back to brushes and talking about the new brush engine and ways of coming in here, as Gump's now showing, and adjusting different settings and all to give you different textured looks or non-textured looks, but with a different feel to the brush itself. So that makes me happy. We've covered a lot of stuff here, and just go out there and start playing with it. Is that good with you guys?
Definitely get in there and
Good.
play. That's good.
Love it.
Have a good time, guys.